The estate of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein has less than 2 weeks to hand over a trove of documents to the House Oversight Committee. The panel has subpoenaed the estate for, among other things, Epstein's will, his financial documents, a reported collection of letters gifted in a so-called 50th birthday book for Epstein, Epstein's non-disclosure agreement with others, and any information that could be part of a potential clients list. The Oversight Committee is also going to interview former Labor Secretary during President Trump's first term, Alex Acosta. Acosta, of course, was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida when he negotiated a 2008 sweetheart deal with Epstein. And joining us now is Liz Stein. She is a survivor of Epstein and Maxwell's trafficking ring. She now works as a survivor mentor and policy associate at the Support Center for Child Advocates in Philadelphia. Liz, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really interested to learn what your reaction is to the contents of the Maxwell transcript, the very fact of her being interviewed by the Deputy Attorney General, her prison transfer, and the overall treatment of Maxwell.
I think that it's pretty obvious that she's not being truthful in this interview. And I think that something that the public might not be aware of, if you're someone who isn't following this case really closely, is that in her federal indictment, there were perjury charges stemming from a deposition that was held in a civil suit involving Virginia Giuffre. And when it came time for Maxwell's trial, those charges were severed because the prosecutors did not want the testimony from those charges to unduly influence the jury. And when she was ultimately convicted of the other counts, those charges were dropped. So we're already talking about someone who has been less than truthful previously. And I think that it's really difficult for us as survivors to have the government speaking to someone who's been convicted of this crime and giving her any weight whatsoever in terms of leniency. I mean, the move to a federal prison camp is really an unprecedented move for someone who's been charged with these crimes. And so I'm just curious why the government is putting so much stock in what Ghislaine Maxwell is saying, but they're not talking to the actual victims of this crime.
You speak very interestingly and movingly about sex trafficking and how it's not probably what the average American envisions when they hear that term. Tell us what you mean.
Yeah. So I think that it's interesting to point out that I am a victim of this crime, and I consider myself to be a reasonably intelligent and aware person, but I didn't even realize that I was trafficked until Epstein was arrested in 2019. The way that it was in my mind was that I became involved with with these friends, and I had a really horrific experience, but I didn't even realize that I had been trafficked until Epstein was arrested. And I think that people are just not educated on what sex trafficking is. I certainly wasn't. I thought that I knew what it was. And I think that that is also a really big piece of the puzzle that's missing. I don't know if people really understand what they're talking about.
Right. You're not like kept in a dungeon, right? You're not kept in a dungeon. You're not chained.
No.
You're manipulated.
No. Yes. And so, the perception, I think, in the media is that, it is a man who comes along in a van and scoops up a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes and takes her somewhere and locks her up and chains her. And sex trafficking does not look like that in the majority of cases at all. Sex trafficking needs 3 elements to be present: force, fraud, and coercion in order to compel someone into a commercial sex act. And a commercial sex act is anything of value that is received for a sex act. And I don't think that people understand that. A lot of the young women that I work with, something of value to them could be housing. It could be a cell phone if they don't have a cell phone. It could be anything that is, of financial benefit to the person who's being compelled to do this act. And I think that there's also a misnomer, too, when people hear coercion, they think that there's some kind of choice in that. And when you're being deceived, there really is no choice. And so I just think that, in addition to people watching the coverage of this particular case, maybe we need some education on what the crime of sex trafficking actually is.
And it's actually interesting because I was reading the Ghislaine Maxwell transcript in her interview that was released Friday afternoon, and she talked about how these masseuses, she calls them, these young women that she, drafted and brought into Epstein's orbit, that there's no way they would ever come back and meet with him again if they had been raped. And that's, of course, a complete misunderstanding of how sex trafficking works, because they would if they depended on Epstein to live or to have a place to live or for money.
Many of them did.
Yeah, exactly. Liz Stein, thank you so much for talking to us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.